Breaking report. The illusion of stability has shattered. Within the darkest corridors of the British monarchy, an unprecedented purge of royal blood has been executed. This is not a routine administrative adjustment. It is an absolute seizure of power, designed to amputate a rogue branch of the dynasty before it brings down the entire crown. For weeks, rumors of an imminent palace coup whispered through the halls of state. Today, those whispers hardened into a cold, terrifying, and unyielding reality. The final signature took less than 3 agonizing seconds, but its tremors will echo across an entire royal generation. Inside the heavy, velvet-draped Buckingham Palace council chamber, the atmosphere was suffocating. Sunlight barely pierced the tall windows as Prince William lowered a heavy gold fountain pen onto an unyielding decree, a document crafted in secret to strip Meghan of her Duchess title and permanently exile both her and Prince Harry from official royal life. No public warning was sounded. There was only one controlled, ruthless movement of the hand, followed by a silence so complete and oppressive that even the senior advisors surrounding the mahogany table seemed terrified to draw breath. The future king kept his hand beside the freshly signed decree, his knuckles white against the dark wood. Across the table sat King Charles, observing the cold resolve of his heir with a father's shattered heart and a monarch's helpless restraint. The king knew this single document did not merely revoke invitations to state banquets. It severed the last thread connecting his youngest son to the institution he was born to serve. When a senior courtier stepped forward with trembling hands to place a sealed black annex beside the decree, a classified attachment containing evidence so explosive it had been withheld from the wider household, the king lowered his eyes in silent agony. A courtier crossed the room toward the master calendar mounted on the wall. With a sharp motion, he peeled 2 white name cards bearing the Sussex name from upcoming royal engagements. The crisp scrape of paper against mahogany sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. King Charles reached out a trembling hand toward the decree, as if to pause the execution, but his fingers hovered in the cold air, paralyzed by the weight of the crown. Slowly, the king withdrew his hand, looked at his eldest son, and whispered in a voice hollowed by grief, "Then it is done." William offered no comfort, no retreat, and no answer. To understand how the monarchy arrived at this historic purge, one must look back to the exact moment reconciliation was murdered. The fracture did not begin in California or inside a television studio. It began behind the oak doors of St. George's Chapel during a private memorial service, an event orchestrated by King Charles as a final attempt to unite his warring family away from the cameras. Under the solemn arches of the chapel, years of suppressed venom erupted into open warfare. Minutes before the service, Meghan stepped into the chapel vestry, a small stone room where clergy prepared for sacred rites. She requested that Catherine, the Princess of Wales, remain behind closed doors with her. Outside, palace aides held their breath, unaware of the trap being set inside. Within the dim vestry, the mask of pleasantry slipped away. Meghan demanded guaranteed central roles at all future sovereign events, demanding balcony appearances and explicit royal recognition for her children, Archie and Lilibet. Catherine responded with measured restraint, explaining that ceremonial positions were earned through working service, not extracted through ultimatums. But composure only fueled hostility. As their voices rose, Meghan declared that the monarchy would need the Sussex brand long before the Sussexes would ever need the crown. At that exact second, Prince William pushed open the heavy door. His eyes landed on a designer handbag left partially open on a side table. Glinting in the dim light was a small, active recording device, its tiny red light pulsing silently in the gloom. The horrifying truth materialized. The confrontation was a calculated operation to capture covert audio for external leverage. When Harry entered moments later, William pointed to the blinking device. Harry's face drained of color. He stammered a denial, but his hesitation lasted a fraction of a second too long. In that brief pause, William's expression hardened from brotherly concern into absolute ice. Outside in the corridor, King Charles stood holding the order of service, listening to the silence. When Meghan emerged, sweeping past without a word, the king folded the paper in his hands and could no longer meet his youngest son's eyes. The sacred sanctuary had been violated, and the path to war was officially set. The discovery of the covert device inside the vestry of St. George's Chapel was not merely a breach of trust. It was an act of institutional aggression that forced the hand of the future king. In the weeks that followed, the private war shifted from quiet diplomacy to ruthless containment. William was no longer acting as a brother seeking reconciliation. He was operating as the custodian of an empire, determined to cauterize a bleeding wound before the infection consumed the crown. Months after the chapel incident, the ultimate confrontation took place inside a small Windsor sitting room. There were no private secretaries, no press handlers, and no prepared speeches. Only 4 chairs arranged around a mahogany table, upon which rested a single unsigned legal document, the Decree of Total Exclusion. The air was heavy with unsaid grievances. Outside, rain lashed against the leaded windows, but inside, the silence was absolute, carrying the terrifying certainty that what was about to transpire could never be undone. Catherine sat beside William, her posture regal yet rigid, her eyes reflecting a somber grief. Opposite them sat Harry and Meghan. The proposed conditions were brutally non-negotiable. Absolute confidentiality, a prohibition on the commercial use of royal titles, an immediate end to unauthorized recording, and permanent exclusion from official events conducted in the Crown's name. William's voice carried an icy detachment. He made it clear that ceremonial access was a privilege born of trust, and that trust had been systematically dismantled. Harry leaned forward, his hands trembling with rage. He accused his elder brother of sacrificing family on the altar of cold institutional survival, claiming Meghan was being persecuted for refusing to submit to a system that failed to protect her. William did not raise his voice. He met his brother's furious gaze and delivered a brutal truth. The Crown could not function while every private exchange was documented, monetized, and weaponized for media broadcasts. Harry called the measure paranoia born of fear. William replied that it was a boundary forged by painful experience. Then came the moment that shattered whatever fragile bond remained. William opened a sealed leather folder resting beside the decree, a classified security report from Palace Intelligence. With agonizing precision, the prince revealed that the telemetry from the recording device found in the vestry was directly linked to a senior strategist on the Sussex media payroll. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Harry turned toward his wife in visible shock, begging with his eyes for a denial, asking if she knew a sacred family memorial had been covertly wired for public consumption. Meghan did not flinch, nor did she speak. Her silence lasted only seconds, but in that pause, the terrible truth was laid bare. Overwhelmed by betrayal, Harry pushed his chair backwards so violently that its legs scraped against the parquet floor with a deafening screech, slamming against the wall. He looked at his brother, then his wife, realizing he was trapped. Yet the fiercest resistance to the decree did not originate in California. It came from Clarence House, where King Charles fought a desperate battle to save his youngest son. Hours before the final signing, the king summoned William into his study. On the desk lay an unsigned letter of mercy, a father's proposal to convert the permanent stripping of titles into a 5-year suspension. Charles pleaded for time, warning that banishment would poison future generations, burdening young Archie and Lilibet with inherited bitterness. William remained unmoved. He explained that a temporary suspension would merely guarantee 5 more years of continuous media warfare, leaving the Princess of Wales and their children exposed to perpetual strain. Then, the king made a devastating confession. Driven by paternal love, Charles admitted he had been sending private letters to Harry via secure courier, attempting to forge a secret path toward redemption without William's knowledge. In response, William produced a draft proposal for an upcoming Sussex commercial streaming venture. Beside it, he laid the king's private correspondence. Multiple phrases from Charles's intimate letters appeared word for word in the commercial production outline. The king's heartfelt words had been transcribed and offered up as media content. King Charles stared at the documents, the color draining from his face. Slowly, he removed his glasses and pressed his fingers against his eyes, shivering in the cold reality of betrayal. The mercy letter lay abandoned on the desk. In a whisper hollowed by defeat, the king conceded, "I wanted to believe he was writing only to me." With those words, the father surrendered to the sovereign. The last shield protecting Harry was gone, leaving William with total authority to execute the final decree. As the embargoed notification reached Montecito, cold panic collided with toxic pride. Across the Atlantic, the formal wording stripped away the last veneer of royalty. But while Meghan immediately mobilized her public relations apparatus to prepare an explosive retaliatory blitz, Prince Harry made a choice that stunned even his closest advisors. Without staff, without press handlers, and without informing his media team, the Duke boarded a private charter under cover of darkness, crossing the Atlantic on a desperate, covert pilgrimage. He was not traveling as a global celebrity or a rebellious prince. He was a desperate son and brother returning to the soil of his birth to face the architect of his exile before the ink on the decree hardened into permanent history. He arrived at dusk, bypassing the grand gates of Buckingham Palace and the historic courts of Windsor Castle. Instead, the meeting was set inside a secluded, unpretentious brick cottage buried deep within the private grounds of the Windsor estate. There were no armed guards at the door, no private secretaries waiting with briefing folders, and no recording devices hidden in handbags. Inside the small, wood-paneled room, illuminated only by the dim glow of a dying hearth, stood Prince William. He was dressed in plain, dark clothes, devoid of royal insignia, yet his posture radiated the heavy, immovable authority of the crown. When Harry stepped across the threshold, the silence between the two brothers felt thick enough to suffocate them. For a long, agonizing minute, neither man spoke. The crackle of embers in the fireplace was the only sound breaking the oppressive stillness. Harry stood with his hands clenched into tight fists, his shoulders rigid with anger and exhaustion. "You didn't just strip her title, William," Harry said, his voice raw, trembling with a mixture of fury and desperate grief. "You erased my life. You erased everything our mother built for us. You turned the crown into a butcher's knife and cut me out of my own family." He stepped closer to the table, his knuckles turning white as he slammed his hand against the polished wood. "Is this what she died for? So you could stand here in the dark and execute your own brother?" William did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He stood with his hands folded behind his back, his eyes steady, dark, and unreadable, the perfect embodiment of sovereign emotional suppression. "Don't speak of our mother to justify what you have allowed," William replied, his voice falling like frost upon the room. "She taught us that duty comes with sacrifice. You sacrificed duty for celebrity, and then you sold our private pain to the highest bidder." William leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the table, closing the physical distance between them. "You came here expecting a fight over titles and access, Harry. You still don't understand. A title is a lease granted by the sovereign. You broke the terms of the lease the moment you put a microphone to our family's chest." Harry's breath hitched in his throat. He looked at his elder brother, searching for any trace of the boy who had walked beside him behind their mother's coffin, the brother who had shielded him from the cruel glare of the world. But that boy was gone, replaced entirely by the uncompromising shadow of the future king. "I didn't know about the recording in the vestry," Harry whispered, his voice cracking under the crushing weight of realization. "I swear to you on our mother's memory, William, I didn't know." William closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, a fleeting flicker of profound human pain passing across his features before he banished it forever. "It doesn't matter anymore whether you knew or whether you were simply blind to it," William said softly, the utter lack of anger in his tone far more devastating than any rage. "The result was the same. The sanctuary was breached. Our father's trust was monetized. You allowed the sacred machinery of this institution to be turned into a spectacle. I am not doing this out of anger, Harry. I am doing this because if I do not protect the crown now, there will be nothing left for my children to inherit." With deliberate slowness, William reached into his coat and produced a single, old, worn photograph. It was a picture of the two young brothers laughing together on the lawns of Highgrove, arms wrapped around each other's shoulders. He laid it gently on the table between them. Right beside it, he placed the official surrender agreement, a legally binding document stipulating that Harry would accept the decree without legal challenge or public retaliation in exchange for retaining unpublicized, private personal access to King Charles as a son, but never again as a royal representative. "This is the choice," William stated, his voice ringing with absolute, final authority. "Sign the agreement, accept the quiet exile, and preserve whatever remains of your dignity and your relationship with Pa. Or fight it in the media and watch me strip every remaining honor, every military patronage, and every line of blood right down to the bedrock. You wanted freedom, Harry. This is what freedom costs." Harry stared down at the table, at the photograph of their lost innocence on one side, and the ruthless legal instrument of his total banishment on the other. The balance of power had shifted forever. The illusion that he could challenge the monarchy from across the ocean and still claim its heritage vanished completely. His chest heaved as tears of helpless rage pooled in his eyes. With a shaking hand, Harry picked up the pen. He looked into his brother's cold, steady eyes one last time, looking for a sign of mercy, a gesture of retreat. He found none. The future king was absolute. Slowly, painfully, Harry pressed the pen to the paper and signed his name, sealing his own exile and cementing the cold triumph of sovereign justice over blood. When dawn broke over London the following morning, no alarm sounded, no trumpets blew, and no public ceremonies heralded the seismic, permanent realignment of royal power. The victory of the crown was quiet, precise, and absolute. At precisely 8 o'clock, as the official media embargo lifted, the royal household executed a silent, devastating administrative purge across every digital and diplomatic platform. Within minutes, the names of Harry and Meghan were excised from the working royal hierarchy on the official crown registry, demoted to a brief, cold footnote at the absolute bottom of the historical ledger. Across government offices, Commonwealth secretariats, intelligence briefings, and official seating charts for foreign state visits, the titles were erased as though they had been scrubbed from existence by an invisible hand. The official press statement released by Buckingham Palace was brutal in its conciseness, containing only 2 cold, sterile sentences, announcing that by sovereign decree, the Duchess of Sussex title had been permanently revoked, and both individuals were excluded from all future state, ceremonial, and official events conducted in the monarchy's name. There was no acknowledgement of past service, no expression of familial warmth, and no benediction for their private life across the ocean. The institution had delivered its verdict not with fiery rage, but with the terrifying, icy indifference of an ancient empire closing its iron gates against the outer darkness. In Montecito, the silence that settled over the estate was heavy, toxic, and suffocating. The grand ambition that commercial independence, high-stakes media leverage, and Hollywood glamour could force an ancient sovereign dynasty to bend shattered completely against the immovable bedrock of the crown. For Meghan, the removal of the Duchess title was not merely a ceremonial downgrade. It was the total destruction of her primary social and commercial currency. Across the entertainment industry and international corporate sectors, executives who had once courted the couple for their proximity to sovereign authority began quietly pulling back, canceling projects, and letting calls go unanswered. Without access to royal balconies, state banquets, or official palace circles, the illusion of regal authority dissolved into mere celebrity tabloid fodder. The real power they had sought to weaponize vanished into thin air. For Harry, trapped inside a gilded mansion thousands of miles from the soil of his birth, a devastating fatalism took hold. He had fought for freedom, only to realize that in surrendering his royal obligations, he had inadvertently erased his own identity, his military brotherhoods, and his place in national history. He was now a prince without a realm, a brother cut off from his bloodline, and an exile wandering through a world that viewed him not as a figure of authority, but as a cautionary tale of tragic self-destruction. Inside the shadowy, echoing staterooms of Clarence House, King Charles confronted the grim, fatalistic reality of his remaining years. The father had been forced to submit to the sovereign, but the absolute preservation of the throne brought no warmth to the aging monarch. In the quiet twilight hours, Charles walked alone through the silent art galleries of the palace, standing before oil portraits of long-dead kings and queens who had been forced to make similar heartbreaking choices between family affection and dynastic survival. He understood now that the burden of the crown is ultimately a solitary burden, one that demands the ultimate sacrifice of personal love for the endurance of the state. The private letters sent across the Atlantic ceased completely. The secret courier routes were dissolved. The king accepted his tragic duty with quiet resignation. He would rule over a stabilized and protected institution, but he would carry the deep, unhealable wound of a father who had presided over the final, formal banishment of his youngest son. For Prince William and Catherine, the storm had passed, leaving behind the cold, uncompromising landscape of absolute authority. William had executed the decree not out of malice, but out of a rigid historical conviction that the crown must be protected at all costs. Standing at the high windows of Kensington Palace, looking out over the damp gardens of London, the future king felt the heavy, suffocating weight of his destiny settling onto his shoulders. He had secured the continuity of the monarchy for his children and demonstrated that no individual could hold the crown hostage to personal grievance. Yet beneath the stoic composure of the air lay a dark, permanent sorrow. He had saved the crown, but he had buried the brother who had once walked beside him through the darkest days of their youth. The bond forged in the tragedy of their mother's death was broken forever, sacrificed on the altar of royal duty. This dark episode stands as a chilling reminder of the fundamental law of sovereign rule. Power is never preserved through compromise, but through the ruthless willingness to eliminate threats to the throne. Throughout centuries of British history, from the blood-soaked courts of the Tudors to the modern constitutional state, the crown has survived not through sentiment or mercy, but through an absolute, terrifying capacity for self-preservation. William's decree was the cold fulfillment of that ancient rule, proving that when the survival of the house is at stake, the monarchy will cut away its own blood without hesitation to ensure its eternal survival. If you found this dramatic exploration of power, betrayal, and royal history compelling, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another breaking report from behind the velvet curtain.